Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com, and today we're looking at game number 4 from the 2018 World Chess Championships between the champion Magnus Carlsen and his competitor Fabiano Caruana. The first 3 games have all been draws. Fabiano's had the white pieces in games 1 and 3. Magnus Carlsen, game number 2, as well as today in game number 4. So we'll go ahead and get into it with Magnus Carlsen starting out with pawn to c4. And this was a surprise. I knew he would have something different for this game. He's played Fabiano 37 times as far as classical, just normal time control, not blitz or rapid, but just these longer style games. 37 times, only played c4 once, so not something Fabiano's used to seeing from Magnus Carlsen. We continue pawn e5, sort of the reverse Sicilian here. Plays very different than normal Sicilian, but a lot of people will refer to it as that. Knight to c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6, getting into the 4 knights game of the English Opening. Always nice to see the English Opening played in London. The fans did enjoy seeing that. So after pawn g3, bishop down here, d5, we do see these pieces come off the board. These are the main lines, but after g2, we see something different. The main line from here would be just to take down on c3. Other options would be to come back to c6, or could have just played bishop to e6. I think all those are fine, getting ready if you wanted to castle on the queen side. But Fabiano played bishop down here to c5. It didn't take long to play this, 7 seconds as a matter of fact, so he was very prepared for this specific opening. Now, castle on the king side. Magnus, if he wanted to, could have taken with his knight. Knight takes up here to e5. Knight takes down c3. We could see the bishop take. A lot of just exchanging on the board. There's the double pawn here on the c file. After the pawn takes, queen comes down here. White can no longer castle. Doesn't matter if as much once the queens come off the board. But you can see bishop comes down here, takes the pawn, rook to f1, forcing the bishop to come back here. It really just depends on how much material both sides want to exchange, because you could have the rook come up here. It's protected by the knight on e5 here. Bishop to d6, forcing the rook to come back, because once the knight moves, the king could just take it. Could see some material exchange right here. Rook over here to e3, taking the bishop because it's being pinned down to the king. These players may not go down this entire variation, but this is definitely going down a path where lots of material is coming off the board. Magnus Carlsen not necessarily looking to do that, so he decides to just castle on the king side. Fabiano responds the same. Castle on the king side. Pawn to d3, opening up for the dark square bishop to get involved into the game. Rook over here to e8, bishop to d2, as we talked about, getting involved. And then the knight takes here on c3. We see the bishop take, knight to d4. So they're just centralizing this piece in the center of the board. Now this is where things are interesting. If you were kind of following along, listening to some of the commentary, you would notice that Fabiano is playing blazing fast. Every move so far was under 10 seconds. The main reason is that he played this exact same game, move for move, just a few months ago against Wesley So at the Grand Chess Tour in Paris. Now, these players spend countless days and months preparing for this tournament. They memorize every game that they've played. Partly they're savants in that respect. They can play 25 different people blindfolded. They just have a mental capacity to do that. So they absolutely know every game they've played. A game they've played a few months ago, they definitely remember. And not only do they remember, but their opponents are studying their opponents' moves in all of their games. So not only does Fabiano remember this, but Magnus Carlsen knows this game as well. And so it really comes to this position where you can really expect Magnus Carlsen to do something. He knows exactly what's going on right here because they're both playing extremely fast. In that specific game, we actually saw the rook come to c1. Now, that was a blitz game, so it was a little quicker, but it ended in a draw. Magnus Carlsen, I'm sure, looked at that. He decides in this position to instead play pawn to b4. So this is new theory as far as this line goes. So the bishop comes back here to d6, and then rook to b1. Now, had a lot of options beside rook to b1. Some of the commentators felt that this was going down really a path that Magnus Carlsen can't lose, but is probably going to be more drawn than actually winning. Other options, if he wanted to be a little bit more aggressive, pawn to e5, a4, or just pawn to e3. Still going to see the exchange here with the knights, but just better as far as giving more opportunities for attacking lines. But he decides to play rook to b1. Knight takes here, bishop recaptures, and then pawn to a6. Now white looking to attack and expand on the queen side, plays pawn to a4. Black would really like to get his light square bishop involved into the game. Unfortunately, can't move it yet because it's the only piece that's defending this pawn here on b7. So first move in between, decides to play pawn to c6 just to stop the threat of the bishop here on f3. Rook over here to e1, preparing to push this pawn forward, and then bishop to d7, as we talked about, getting the bishop involved into the game. Pawn to e3, queen down here to f6, just trying to help control the center of the board. It's behind two bishops, so it wasn't doing too much, recognizing that it needs to try to control something in the middle. Bishop here to e4, and this is a pretty good setup that Magnus Carlsen has. He has a very active board, both of his bishops in the center, doing a lot more than Fabiano. The bishop back here on d7, not doing too much, and this bishop here on d6 really just playing defender, not really attacking too much on the board. So Fabiano decides if he's in a situation he doesn't like, it's time to exchange material. So bishop to f5, and we start to see some material come off the board. Queen f3, bishop takes, queen takes here on f6, pawn takes on f6, and then pawn recaptures on e4. So both sides do have double pawns on the e and the f file, but they pretty much negate each other's weakness out. Now pawn down to b5. Magnus Carlsen has a few options. Always think about this in your own games. He could decide to go ahead and take. He could push forward with a5 if he wants to. Always keep in mind that if you're going to play a5, this all of a sudden puts two pawns on dark squares. Your opponent has a dark square bishop on the board, so you don't want to be putting as many pieces and pawns on dark squares. So Magnus Carlsen, he's not looking to do that right away. He first plays rook to d1, attacking the bishop. Bishop's forced to move, comes back here to f8, and then we see the pawn take on b5. So this, they really ends up being the same as far as material standpoint, but always looking for those small things. It was not going to haunt him right away, but later in the game, as we get to an endgame state, both bishops probably going to be on the board. You don't want to have those pawns on dark squares if you don't have to. So the pawn recaptures on b5, king to g2, getting it involved into the game. Rook to d8, rook to c1. Magnus Carlsen not quite yet looking to get straight down to the endgame, exchange off the rooks. King to g7, bishop back here to e1. Rook c8, just defending this backward pawn here on c6. Magnus opened up the door to attack that, bringing the bishop down here to e1. Now the rook on c1 is able to attack that. So it needs to protect the backward pawn. So rook to c8. Now rook to c2, allowing for the other rook to come to c1 and just double barrel here. We see rook down to a4. It says, yeah, if you want to move that rook, that's going to cost you because now I'm going to add an attacker here. Yes, the bishop is defending it, but black also has his own bishop here on f8 attacking this pawn on b4. Now king to f3, just centralizing the king. Pawn to h5, not much going on the queen side that black can really do here. So just decides to push up with his pawn h5. King to e2. King g6, pawn h3, decides to go ahead and exchange material in the center. Both sides no longer have their double pawns on the e and the f file. Pawn to f3, bishop to e7, just getting it more involved into the game. Still wants to stay on this long dark diagonal to attack this pawn here on b4. But this does open up the door. If he needs to come over and defend the king side of the board, he can. Pawn to e4, check. King comes over here to e6. Bishop to d2, bishop down here to d6, very similar move as the one before. Rook to c1, so it says, yeah, I'm giving up this pawn right here, but I can just attack and take this material here on C6. And then from here, the players decided to draw. It's only 34 moves in. Yeah, it's fairly drawish, I would state, but I feel like both players can absolutely find some lines in here to give their opponents something to think about, at least. But in the game, 34 moves, and we have a draw. So fairly disappointing, I think. Magnus Carlsen even afterwards said it was disappointing for him. He felt like he's been getting out-prepared by Fabiano, especially when Fabiano has the black pieces. Carlsen said he needs to play better. He needs to start getting some win, especially when he has the white pieces. Has not done so far. So 4 games in, we have 4 draws. We will have a rest day tomorrow, hoping that both sides can get some well-deserved rest, but also work with their teams and see if they can find some unique lines that the players haven't seen. Really what comes out of that is lots of time early on as players are just thinking about the situation. That tends to later on in the game, less time for them to think. Lots of crazy things can happen on the board, whether that's errors or just lines where there's 4 or 5 different variations. They have to really think about it. That should, I think, get us a victory in the near term. But we will see. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you're enjoying the tournament, and I will see you in 2 days for game number 5.